March 15th, 1943, 06:20 hours, skies over Tunisia, North Africa. The twin-engine silhouette cut through morning haze as Luftwaffe pilots spotted what they called the fork-tailed devil approaching from the west. German fighter command had briefed their aces that American aircraft were heavy, slow, and piloted by inexperienced flyers who relied on numbers rather than skill. The P-38 Lightning, with its unconventional twin-boom design, seemed to confirm every stereotype about American engineering. Overbuilt, unnecessarily complex, a plane designed by committees rather than warriors. Within minutes, 3 Messerschmitt Bf 109s would discover how catastrophically wrong those assumptions were. The mathematics of aerial combat were about to deliver a lesson that would shatter every belief German pilots held about American aviation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell gripped the control yoke of her P-38 Lightning as she climbed to 20,000 feet. She was one of the few female pilots who had fought through prejudice, doubt, and military regulations to earn her wings and a combat assignment. The men in her squadron had questioned whether a woman could handle the raw power of the Lightning's twin Allison engines, each producing 1,475 horsepower. They wondered if she possessed the split-second reflexes needed for dogfighting against the Luftwaffe's best pilots. Sarah had spent months proving herself in training, mastering the Lightning's unique characteristics, learning to think 3 moves ahead in aerial chess matches that would be decided in seconds. Today would be her first real test against enemy fighters who had dominated European skies for 3 years. The P-38 Lightning was unlike any fighter aircraft in the world. Designed by Lockheed's Clarence Kelly Johnson and his team, it featured a central nacelle containing the cockpit and armament, flanked by twin booms housing the engines and connecting to the tail assembly. German intelligence reports had analyzed photographs of the Lightning and concluded it represented American design philosophy gone wrong. Too heavy, at 17,500 pounds fully loaded, too complex with its twin engines and tricycle landing gear, too expensive to produce in meaningful numbers. Luftwaffe tactical briefings assured German pilots that the Lightning would be easy prey, a lumbering giant that couldn't match the agility of the Bf 109 or the Focke-Wulf 190. These assessments would prove fatally incorrect. The Lightning's unconventional design solved problems that German engineers hadn't even recognized. The tricycle landing gear eliminated the ground handling difficulties that plagued tail-dragging fighters, allowing better visibility during takeoff and landing. The counter-rotating propellers canceled out engine torque, making the Lightning stable and forgiving during high-speed maneuvers that would have sent single-engine fighters into deadly spins. The twin-boom configuration allowed concentrated nose armament, 4.50 caliber machine guns, and one 20mm cannon, all firing along the aircraft's centerline without the synchronization problems that reduced the effectiveness of guns firing through propeller arcs. This meant every round went exactly where the pilot aimed, creating devastating accuracy that German pilots would learn to fear. Sarah scanned the horizon, her eyes trained to spot the tiny specks that meant enemy aircraft. Her radio crackled with reports from ground observers. German fighters were engaging American bombers 30 miles northeast. She pushed the throttles forward, feeling the Lightning surge with power that still amazed her after dozens of training flights. The Allison V1710 engines roared, their turbo superchargers forcing air into the cylinders, maintaining power at altitudes where German fighters gasped for oxygen. At 25,000 feet, the P-38 was just reaching its optimal performance envelope, while Messerschmitts struggled with thinning air and reduced engine output. The German pilots who first encountered P-38 Lightnings in North Africa sent back reports that Berlin initially dismissed as exaggeration or pilot error. How could American fighters, built by a nation with no aerial combat tradition, outperform aircraft designed by engineers who had refined fighter design since the Great War? The Bf-109, after all, was the culmination of German aeronautical excellence, a design that had evolved through constant combat testing from Spain to Poland to the Battle of Britain. Its pilots were veterans who had shot down hundreds of Allied aircraft. Yet the reports kept coming. American twin-engine fighters were achieving kill ratios that seemed impossible. They climbed faster than expected, dove faster than believed possible, and their firepower destroyed German aircraft with single bursts. Oberst Hans Richter, a Luftwaffe ace with 43 confirmed kills, wrote in his combat diary after an engagement near Bizerte, "The American Lightning appeared from above, diving at speeds we could not match. My wingman exploded before he could react. I attempted a climbing turn to engage, but the Lightning followed easily, maintaining position despite my best evasive maneuvers. Only by diving to ground level and using terrain masking did I escape. This aircraft is not what we were told to expect." That diary entry, captured after Richter's airfield was overrun by Allied ground forces, contradicted every briefing German pilots had received about American fighter capabilities. Sarah spotted them, three dark shapes against white clouds, Messerschmitt Bf 109s in a defensive formation protecting a group of Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers returning from a mission. The German fighters flew at 18,000 feet, confident in their altitude advantage over the lumbering American bombers they expected to encounter. They hadn't spotted Sarah's Lightning climbing through scattered clouds 3,000 feet above them. She had learned in training that the P-38's twin-engine configuration made it quieter than single-engine fighters, harder to detect until too late. She also knew that German pilots tended to look down for threats rather than up, a tactical blindness that American pilots were taught to exploit. The Lightning's speed was its secret weapon, something German intelligence had catastrophically underestimated. In level flight, the P-38 could reach 414 miles per hour, faster than any German fighter except the rare Focke-Wulf 190D models that were still experimental. But the Lightning's real advantage appeared in the dive. The twin boom design and heavy weight that German analysts had cited as weaknesses became devastating strengths when gravity joined the fight. Sarah rolled inverted and pulled the stick back, diving nearly vertical toward the unsuspecting Messerschmitts below. The airspeed indicator unwound rapidly, 400, 450, 500 miles per hour. At these speeds, German fighters would have experienced severe control stiffening, making maneuvering nearly impossible. The Lightning's hydraulically boosted controls remained responsive, allowing Sarah to make precise adjustments even as physics tried to tear the aircraft apart. The P-38's dive speed had shocked Luftwaffe pilots from the first engagements. German fighters were limited to approximately 470 miles per hour before control surfaces became dangerously stiff or structural failure threatened. The Lightning could exceed 550 miles per hour in a dive without loss of control. This meant American pilots could dictate engagement terms, diving to attack, then using speed to escape before German fighters could react. Luftwaffe tactical manuals, designed around the performance envelope of the Bf 109, had no effective countermeasures for an enemy that could appear from above at speeds that seemed aerodynamically impossible. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Sarah lined up the lead Messerschmitt in her gun sight, a simple illuminated reticle that required precise judgment and steady nerves. The range closed rapidly, 800 yards, 600, 400. At 300 yards, she squeezed the trigger. The Lightning's nose erupted with fire as 450 caliber machine guns and the 20mm cannon fired simultaneously. The concentration of firepower was devastating. Unlike German fighters with wing-mounted weapons creating convergence problems, every round from the Lightning's nose armament traveled the same path. The lead Messerschmitt disintegrated, pieces of wing and fuselage spinning away as the pilot never knew what hit him. Sarah pulled back on the stick, the Lightning's airframe groaning under 9 times the force of gravity as she executed a high-speed climbing turn that would have caused a German fighter to stall and snap roll. The 2 surviving Messerschmitts broke formation, diving desperately to escape. Their pilots now understood they faced something deadlier than intelligence briefings had suggested. Sarah pursued, the Lightning's twin engines screaming as she converted altitude into speed. The German pilots tried every evasive maneuver in their playbook: split S-turns, barrel rolls, scissors maneuvers designed to force an overshoot. Against a Bf-109 or Spitfire, these tactics would have worked. Against the Lightning's overwhelming power and speed advantage, they merely delayed the inevitable. Sarah remained patient, knowing the P-38's fuel capacity gave her time, while the German pilots burned through their limited reserves with desperate maneuvering. The second Messerschmitt made a fatal mistake, attempting a climbing turn to gain altitude advantage. Sarah followed effortlessly, the Lightning's turbocharged engines maintaining full power, while the Messerschmitt's engine lost compression in the thinning air. She closed to 200 yards and fired a 2-second burst. The Messerschmitt's left wing folded upward as cannon shells destroyed the main spar. The aircraft tumbled sideways, the pilot ejecting moments before it exploded. The third German pilot, seeing his formation destroyed in less than 2 minutes, made the only rational choice. He dove for ground level and fled at maximum speed, hoping the Lightning pilot wouldn't pursue into the flak zones protecting German positions. Sarah let him go. Her fuel gauges showed she had loitered at combat power longer than recommended. She turned west, throttling back to cruise settings, feeling the adrenaline slowly drain from her system. 2 confirmed kills on her first combat mission. The doubters in her squadron would have to revise their opinions about female combat pilots. More importantly, she had experienced firsthand why the Lightning was reshaping aerial warfare. The aircraft wasn't just good, it was revolutionary, combining speed, firepower, range, and altitude performance in ways that made traditional fighter design obsolete. Back at the American Air Base, intelligence officers debriefed Sarah while mechanics examined her Lightning for battle damage. They found none. She had engaged 3 enemy fighters, destroyed 2, scattered the formation, and returned without a scratch. The kill ratio being achieved by P-38 squadrons was approaching 5-to-1 in the Lightning's favor, numbers that traditional fighter combat doctrines suggested were impossible. German fighters being flown by experienced pilots should have achieved parity or better against American aviators who had only months of combat experience. Instead, American Lightning pilots were systematically destroying Luftwaffe formations with minimal losses. The P-38 Lightning's development had begun in 1937 when the U.S. Army Air Corps issued a specification for a high-altitude interceptor. Lockheed's design team, led by the brilliant Kelly Johnson, created an aircraft that exceeded every requirement. The prototype XP-38 first flew on January 27, 1939, immediately demonstrating performance that shocked observers. It could reach 413 miles per hour and climb to 20,000 feet in 6 minutes, capabilities that made every existing fighter obsolete. The Army ordered 13 pre-production aircraft, then placed orders for hundreds before a single production model had flown. German intelligence obtained photographs and specifications of the P-38 through various channels throughout 1940 and 1941. Luftwaffe technical analysis concluded the design was flawed, too heavy, too complex, unsuitable for aerial combat against agile single-engine fighters. These assessments were based on traditional fighter design principles that the Lightning's engineers had deliberately violated. Kelly Johnson understood that speed and firepower could substitute for agility, that structural strength could enable tactics impossible for lighter aircraft, that twin engines provided safety and range that single-engine fighters couldn't match. The Germans analyzed the Lightning using the wrong framework, like critics judging a race car by the standards of a horse and buggy. Production of the P-38 Lightning accelerated rapidly as American industry mobilized for war. Lockheed's Burbank, California facility expanded continuously, eventually employing over 94,000 workers. By 1943, the factory was producing 1 P-38 every 43 minutes during peak production periods. This industrial capacity terrified German planners, who understood their aircraft industry, even with slave labor and total mobilization, could not match American output. The Lightning also represented distributed production capability, complex aircraft being built not in scattered workshops, but on assembly lines using interchangeable parts and semi-skilled labor, exactly the mass production philosophy that made American industry unstoppable. The Lightning's combat debut had occurred in August 1942 when the first fighter group flew missions from Iceland, engaging German Focke-Wulf FW-200 Condor maritime patrol aircraft. Those first encounters demonstrated the P-38's massive range advantage. It could escort bombers or conduct sweeps hundreds of miles from base, something single-engine fighters couldn't achieve. But the Lightning's true capabilities emerged in North Africa, when American pilots began engaging Luftwaffe fighters in serious numbers. German pilots expected easy victories against inexperienced Americans. Instead, they encountered an aircraft that negated every tactical advantage the Luftwaffe had refined over 3 years of war. Sarah's squadron, the 14th Fighter Group, had arrived in North Africa in November 1942 as part of Operation Torch. The squadron's Lightning pilots were mostly young Americans with minimal combat experience, facing Luftwaffe veterans who had fought in Poland, France, Britain, and Russia. Traditional military logic suggested the Germans would dominate through superior experience and tactics. Instead, the Lightning's technical advantages allowed American pilots to survive their learning curve and rapidly develop into effective fighter pilots. The aircraft forgave mistakes that would have been fatal in less capable fighters. Its redundant systems kept pilots alive when damage would have downed single-engine aircraft. Its overwhelming performance meant American pilots could choose when to fight and when to escape, controlling engagement terms in ways German pilots had never encountered. By April 1943, Luftwaffe fighter units in North Africa were reporting critical morale problems. Experienced pilots who had dismissed American fighters as inferior were being shot down by novices flying Lightnings. German tactical manuals had no effective counters for an aircraft that could dive away at impossible speeds, then climb back to altitude faster than pursuers could follow. The Messerschmitt Bf 109G, theoretically the Luftwaffe's answer to Allied fighter improvements, was being outclassed in every performance category except possibly low-speed maneuverability, a quality that mattered little when the Lightning pilot could simply add power and disengage from any unfavorable situation. The Mediterranean theater became the Lightning's proven ground. American P-38 squadrons flew bomber escort missions deep into enemy territory, fighter sweeps against Luftwaffe airfields, ground attack missions supporting Allied advances, and long-range reconnaissance flights that single-engine aircraft couldn't attempt. The Lightning's versatility amazed both American commanders and German opponents. A single aircraft type was replacing multiple specialized designs, simplifying logistics and training while maintaining superior performance in every role. One engagement that exemplified the Lightning's dominance occurred on April 18, 1943, when 16 P-38s from the 339th Fighter Squadron flew 435 miles over open ocean to intercept Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's transport aircraft near Bougainville. The mission required precise navigation, perfect timing, and aircraft with sufficient range to fly over 1,000 miles round trip while retaining combat capability. Only the P-38 Lightning could attempt such a mission. The interception succeeded, Yamamoto was killed, and American Lightning pilots returned safely despite Japanese fighter opposition.
This single mission demonstrated capabilities the German planners found deeply troubling. American fighters could reach targets that Luftwaffe planners had considered safe due to range limitations. Sarah flew her 20th combat mission in early May 1943, leading a 4-ship formation escorting B-17 bombers attacking Axis supply lines. German fighters rose to intercept, and the familiar dance of aerial combat began. But now Sarah was no longer the nervous rookie from her first mission. She had learned to read the battle, to anticipate enemy moves, to use the Lightning's strengths while avoiding its few weaknesses. When Messerschmitts attacked the bombers from below, she dove her formation through their midst, scattering them with accurate fire and overwhelming speed. The German pilots broke off their attack, unwilling to face Lightning escorts that could destroy them before they reached the vulnerable bombers. After landing, Sarah's crew chief pointed out new features on her Lightning: upgraded engines, improved turbo superchargers, refined control surfaces. American aircraft industry was continuously improving the P-38, incorporating combat lessons into production models, while German industry struggled to maintain existing production levels under constant Allied bombing. Every month, Lightning pilots received aircraft that were faster, climbed better, handled more responsively than the previous month's production. German pilots flew essentially the same Bf-109G they had received a year earlier, facing opponents whose equipment improved constantly while theirs stagnated. The summer of 1943 brought intensified air combat over Sicily and southern Italy as Allied forces prepared for the invasion of mainland Europe. Sarah's squadron relocated to airfields in Malta, placing them within striking distance of Axis positions across the Mediterranean. The Lightning pilots now faced an enemy growing increasingly desperate. Luftwaffe fighter units, depleted by months of attrition and unable to replace losses at the rate Americans replaced theirs, adopted more aggressive tactics born from desperation rather than confidence. German pilots who had once mocked the fork-tailed devil now approached encounters with the Lightning with grim determination, knowing they were flying inferior equipment against opponents whose skill improved with each mission. The psychological impact of the Lightning's dominance cannot be overstated. German pilots began developing what American intelligence analysts called lightning fever, a reluctance to engage the distinctive twin-boom silhouette even when tactical situations favored German forces. Luftwaffe squadron commanders complained that experienced pilots were avoiding combat with P-38s, breaking off attacks against bombers when Lightning escorts appeared, choosing survival over mission completion. This represented a catastrophic shift in fighter pilot mentality. The Luftwaffe had built its reputation on aggressive, relentless fighter pilots who pressed attacks regardless of odds. Now, those same pilots were declining combat when they spotted Lightnings, recognizing that engaging meant accepting heavy casualties for minimal gains. Sarah witnessed this psychological shift during a bomber escort mission in June 1943. Her four-ship Lightning formation was protecting a group of B-25 Mitchell bombers attacking harbor facilities at Messina.
German fighters appeared, a large formation of perhaps 20 Bf-109s and FW-190s positioned perfectly to intercept the bombers before they reached their target. Sarah's formation turned toward the enemy fighters, accelerating to attack speed. The German formation hesitated, individual aircraft breaking away, the cohesion of their attack dissolving before a shot was fired. The remaining German pilots made half-hearted passes at the bombers, but broke off early, unwilling to press through the Lightning screen. The bombers completed their mission without loss. Sarah's flight hadn't fired their guns, yet they had accomplished their mission through reputation alone. The production numbers told a story of industrial might that German planners found increasingly horrifying. By mid-1943, Lockheed was producing over 500 P-38 Lightnings per month. Total production would eventually reach 10,037 aircraft, a number that exceeded the entire fighter production of some nations throughout the entire war. But quantity meant nothing without quality, and the Lightning maintained exceptional build quality despite mass production. Each aircraft rolled off the assembly line with precisely manufactured components, interchangeable parts, and reliability that German pilots envied when they examined captured examples. German aviation industry, by contrast, was fragmenting under Allied bombing pressure. Aircraft factories were dispersed to avoid destruction, quality control collapsed, and production numbers declined despite desperate efforts to increase output. The Messerschmitt Bf-109, Germany's primary fighter, was being produced in underground factories using slave labor under conditions that made precision manufacturing impossible. German pilots received aircraft with mismatched components, engines that failed prematurely, and weapons that jammed frequently. The industrial war was being lost as decisively as the air war, and the two were inseparable. Major Elena Rodriguez joined Sarah's squadron in July 1943, another female pilot who had fought through institutional resistance to earn her place in combat operations. Elena had grown up in Texas, learned to fly in her father's crop dusting business, and possessed natural flying ability that made her a formidable combat pilot. She brought news from training squadrons back in the United States. Hundreds of new Lightning pilots were in the pipeline, being trained in tactics that exploited the aircraft's unique capabilities. The Luftwaffe faced an enemy that was learning, adapting, and growing stronger every month, while German fighter forces contracted under relentless attrition. Elena's first combat mission exemplified how American pilots were developing tactics specifically designed for the Lightning's characteristics. The squadron encountered a large formation of German bombers escorted by fighters attempting to strike Allied shipping near Palermo. Traditional fighter tactics called for engaging the escorts first, then attacking the bombers. Elena suggested a different approach. Half the Lightning formation would use their superior speed to blow through the fighter screen and attack the bombers directly, while the other half engaged the escorts. The tactic worked perfectly. German fighters found themselves facing a terrible choice: pursue the Lightnings attacking their bombers and expose their tails to the other Lightning element, or engage the escorts and watch their bombers get slaughtered. The German formation broke apart in confusion, and Allied fighters destroyed 6 bombers and 4 fighters without loss.
This engagement demonstrated something German tactical doctrine couldn't counter. American pilots were innovating faster than Luftwaffe training schools could adapt. The Lightning's performance envelope enabled tactics that were impossible with other aircraft. German fighters optimized for turning combat at moderate speeds found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to turn, instead using vertical maneuvers, high-speed slashing attacks, and energy tactics that negated traditional dogfighting skills. Experienced German aces found their hard-won expertise becoming irrelevant against American pilots who fought using completely different principles. The invasion of mainland Italy in September 1943 placed enormous demands on Allied air power. Lightning squadrons flew multiple missions daily, providing air superiority over the beachheads, escorting bombers deep into enemy territory, and conducting armed reconnaissance that kept German ground forces under constant pressure. Sarah flew 6 missions in 2 days during the Salerno landings, her Lightning absorbing battle damage on 3 occasions, yet bringing her safely back to base each time. The aircraft's redundancy, 2 engines, 2 tail booms, and rugged construction meant it could sustain damage that would doom single-engine fighters. German pilots learned to fear the Lightning's durability as much as its performance. Luftwaffe gunnery training emphasized achieving quick kills with short bursts of fire, a necessity when limited ammunition and fuel meant extended engagements were impossible. But Lightnings absorbed hits that should have been fatal and kept fighting. German after-action reports described frustration at hitting Lightnings repeatedly without visible effect, only to have the American aircraft turn and destroy its attacker with a single accurate burst. The Lightning's armor protection, self-sealing fuel tanks, and redundant systems meant American pilots survived encounters that would have killed pilots in more fragile aircraft. By October 1943, Sarah had achieved 10 confirmed aerial victories, making her one of the top female aces in the war. Her success wasn't about superhuman reflexes or exceptional eyesight. It was about understanding her aircraft better than opponents understood theirs, about using the Lightning's strengths to create situations where German pilots had no good options, about patience and discipline in waiting for the perfect shot rather than spraying ammunition wildly. She had learned that aerial combat was about energy management, about converting altitude into speed and speed into position, about thinking 3-dimensionally while maintaining awareness of everything happening in the airspace around her. German squadrons waited weeks or months for replacement aircraft and pilots, and when they arrived, the aircraft were often rebuilt from salvaged parts, and the pilots had minimal training due to fuel shortages limiting flight hours. The mathematical reality was inescapable. America was producing pilots and aircraft faster than Germany could destroy them, while German losses were permanent and irreplaceable. The winter of 1943 brought new challenges as Allied forces ground slowly up the Italian peninsula against fierce German resistance. Lightning squadrons operated from primitive airfields carved from muddy fields, their ground crews performing miracles of maintenance under terrible conditions. Yet aircraft availability remained high because Lockheed engineers had designed the Lightning for easy maintenance. Major components could be replaced quickly using simple tools. The twin-engine configuration meant a damaged engine could be swapped without removing the entire power plant. German fighters required specialized tools, trained mechanics, and workshop facilities that were increasingly rare as Allied bombing destroyed German infrastructure. Sarah flew her 50th combat mission in December 1943, leading a fighter sweep over Rome. Her formation of 8 Lightnings encountered no enemy fighters. The Luftwaffe had withdrawn most units from Italy to defend Germany itself against escalating American bomber raids. The absence of opposition was itself a victory, proof that Allied air superiority was becoming total. German ground forces fought without air cover, exposed to constant attack, unable to move during daylight without risking destruction from above. The Lightning had helped achieve what no amount of ground combat could accomplish alone, the paralysis of enemy forces through air dominance. Elena achieved ace status, 5 confirmed victories during a mission that demonstrated how far American fighter tactics had evolved. Her flight intercepted German transport aircraft attempting to supply isolated mountain positions. The transports were escorted by 4 Bf-109s, experienced pilots flying with skill and determination. Elena didn't engage the escorts directly. Instead, her Lightnings used their speed advantage to position above and behind the German formation, then dove through in a coordinated attack that destroyed 3 transports in seconds. The German escorts tried to intercept but couldn't match the Lightning's dive speed. Elena's flight climbed away, reset their position, and dove again. Within 5 minutes, all 7 German aircraft were destroyed without a single Lightning taking hits. The engagement exemplified perfect execution of energy tactics, using speed and altitude as weapons more devastating than guns alone. The spring of 1944 brought preparations for the invasion of France, and Lightning squadrons redeployed to England. Sarah's squadron would be part of the massive air armada supporting Operation Overlord. The Lightning pilots knew they were flying the aircraft that had helped achieve air superiority, that had protected bombers during their campaigns against German industry, that had demonstrated American industrial might could overcome any enemy, regardless of their experience or fighting spirit. They carried confidence earned through 2 years of combat flying an aircraft that had proven itself in every imaginable situation. German fighter forces defending France were shadows of their former strength. Experienced pilots were dead or transferred to defend Germany itself.
Replacement pilots had minimal training and flew aircraft that were wearing out faster than they could be repaired. Luftwaffe commanders knew they faced overwhelming odds, that American fighters, particularly the dreaded Lightning, could appear anywhere, anytime, in numbers that made effective defense impossible. The psychological advantage had shifted completely. German pilots flew defensively, hoping to survive rather than expecting to win. Sarah participated in the D-Day operations, flying multiple missions over the invasion beaches. German fighter opposition was sporadic and ineffective. The few Luftwaffe aircraft that appeared were swarmed by Allied fighters and quickly destroyed. The Lightning had contributed to this situation through months of relentless attrition, destroying German aircraft faster than they could be replaced, forcing the Luftwaffe into a defensive posture from which there was no recovery. The invasion succeeded partly because Allied air forces, spearheaded by aircraft like the Lightning, had won the air war so decisively that German ground forces had no aerial support whatsoever. The final months of European combat saw Lightning squadrons pushing deep into Germany, escorting bombers to targets that would have been unreachable 2 years earlier. Sarah flew her 100th combat mission in March 1945, leading a formation that encountered no opposition because the Luftwaffe had essentially ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. The war would end in May, and Sarah would return home knowing she had been part of something extraordinary, a transformation of aerial warfare that proved technology and industrial capacity could overcome any enemy. The P-38 Lightning had accomplished everything its designers promised and more. It had destroyed thousands of enemy aircraft, protected countless bombers, supported ground operations across multiple theaters, and demonstrated that American engineering could produce weapon systems superior to anything the enemy fielded.
The aircraft that German pilots had mocked as an ungainly fork-tailed devil had become the symbol of American air dominance, proof that innovation and industrial might were more powerful than tradition and military experience. For Sarah and thousands of pilots like her, the Lightning represented opportunity, the chance to serve in combat, to prove that gender was irrelevant when measuring courage and skill, to be part of a technological revolution that changed warfare forever. The Lightning had given them the tools to succeed, and they had used those tools to help win a war against enemies who believed themselves superior. The mathematics of aerial combat had been rewritten by an aircraft that refused to follow conventional design rules, and in that rewriting, democracy had proven it could outthink, outproduce, and outfight tyranny.